I'm Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 98.
And this week it's Daisy's turn. Daisy, what do you have for us?
Well, Terry, this week I went looking for a quick episode. As it turns out, I had more time than I thought we had to record because I was geared up for recording a couple of days ago. But I went to our very useful podcast when we're looking for a quick episode. And I know you're nodding and smiling because you know exactly what I'm going to say. Quick.
No pun intended.
Exactly. Kwik Brain with Jim Kwik. And this is episode number 271. Activate your brain for greater physical and mental strength with Anat Baniel. And this is about Neuro Movement. I can't remember. I think this is a term that she's coined. I'm not entirely sure. But she has a book called Move into Life. And it's one of those episodes. Sometimes they give everything away about the book, don't they? And you sort of think, that's interesting. You go on to read the book and you realise that you've heard it all in the podcast. Well, this is one of these ones where it's more of a teaser, I think, because there was quite a lot of information that I felt I needed to read the book. I did actually go looking for some more information and gleaned a little bit more from the internet. But I think it's one of those times where you probably do need to actually go and read the book. But she talks about the concept Neuro Movement, which she describes as empowering learning and creating possibilities using movement as a mechanism of communicating with the brain. And she has what she calls the 9 essentials. And I think from Jim Kwik's description of her, to start with, when he introduces her, he says that she works with adults and children overcoming limitation, and mentioned working with kids with autism and things. So although they didn't directly reference it, I get the impression that although they're talking very specifically about, we'll find out in a minute, but about developing movement and creating ways for the brain to learn, I got the impression that it has a ripple effect for other things that the brain impacts, things like autism and what have you. That's the impression I got, but they didn't directly reference it. But so she started talking about some of these 9 essentials, which she describes as ways of applying yourself, and you can use them to upgrade your brain. And who doesn't want to upgrade your brain? I certainly do. And this helps you, apparently, make better sense of the world and to learn better. One of the overriding themes seems to be that the brain's ability to perceive differences is key when it comes to learning. But she starts with the first one that she cites is movement with attention. So she says, rather than doing things automatically, to pay attention to how you feel when you move. And apparently when you do this, the brain makes more connections and it intensifies these connections. And they talk about, children tend to live in this much more sensory environment. And if you think about it, they're learning all the time. Their environment is a constant sort of learning process. So it's no coincidence that they connect this very sort of sensory environment and learning, that the two things go together. She mentioned that the estimated rate of these new connections that our brain can make is about 1 billion new connections every 10 minutes. So she mentions doing things in sort of blocks of 10 to 15 minutes is quite good because, otherwise you sort of tire out. But she says, so what you need to do is to just slow the speed down of something that you're doing, an exercise that you're doing, and take a few minutes to really feel what's going on and pay attention to this sensory world. And that takes her on to her second one, which is slowing down. This allows you to feel what's going on and to perceive differences. And she says the brain is in an optimal learning mode when it's perceiving these differences and the power. There's a lot of power in differentiation. And that takes it on to the third one, which is variation. And she describes this as creating intentional difference. Says this is a great learning environment for the brain. So change things up a bit and think of different ways of doing the same thing. And she actually takes Jim through a set of movements. And if you go and look on YouTube at her TED talk, she demonstrates it as well with people in the audience. She actually has them bending over at the waist to sort of touch their toes, seeing how far they can reach down naturally. And then she says, in general, what would you think of doing if you wanted to be able to reach further? She said most people would just continue in a linear way, trying to extend that movement, but sort of very linear, doing more of the same. And what she demonstrates is actually, and she puts some of these 9 essentials into practice, that actually doing something different, movement with attention, slowing down, bringing in variation, and some other things she talks about. The fourth one she goes on to is reduction of force, which is the more intensity you put into something, the bigger the differences required for the brain to perceive differences. So if you actually pull back a bit and reduce that force, you allow the brain the time to perceive the differences. And this perceiving the differences is important. And she goes through these steps. She gets people to do different movements. So the first thing is she has them reach back and doing some back stretches. And then she has them reach down again towards their toes. They can get a little bit further. Then she comes back on and she introduced twists and different things. So she puts into practice these different things she's saying and demonstrates how this can get you closer to your goal. And what I really liked about this overall is that it taps into what caught my attention the other day with an episode I shared, with this idea of expansion and looking left and right rather than always just forwards. And she talks about it, the difference between this just sort of linear direction, but instead of that, using these 9 essentials to expand sideways. Another one she mentioned to him, she described as backing off from your goal to give you the freedom to experiment. And again, it's just instead of this driven focus forwards, is just to take some time to just sort of back off from that goal a bit and expand sideways. And they stopped there. So they got to, 5 out of the 9 essentials. So I did go looking to see if I could find what the 9 were. And I came across a website called brightmindmovement.com. And they listed them with slightly different terms for some of them, but some of them were the same. So the first one was this movement with attention. Bring attention to what you feel as you move. Your brain will immediately start building billions of new neurological connections to help you change, learn, and transform. Number 2, slow. Slow down to learn new skills and overcome limitations. If you're moving quickly, when it's fast movement, you can only do what you already know. Whereas if you slow down, this stimulates the formation of new neural patterns. And what I'm assuming is if you apply this to exercise, it has this ripple effect to other things, more some of the sort of mental conditions as well. Number 3, variation. Brain gets information it needs from variation to create new possibilities in movement, thoughts and actions. Number 4, subtlety, but this is what she described as reducing the force. Reduce the force with which you move, think and act. And this will develop greater sensitivity and enhances your brain's ability to perceive the finest of differences. And then some other ones that she didn't mention. Enthusiasm is number 5. Enthusiasm tells your brain what is important to you, amplifying whatever that is and infusing it with energy to grow more. Number 6, flexible goals. Know your goals and embrace all the unexpected steps. And I guess this was what she was describing as backing off from your goal a bit. But they talk about, knowing your goals, but embracing the unexpected steps along the way, the missteps, the reroutes. And these are rich sources of valuable information for your brain. Number 7, the learning switch. Expect that you will do, think, or learn something new in each situation, even familiar ones. So I quite like that, setting up the expectation that there's always something new to learn, even if it's something that's so familiar to you. And you need to switch on this learning switch for the brain to do its job properly. Number 8, imagination and dreams. Imagine how to carry out tasks and dream up as many possibilities as you can. Imagination and dreams guide your brain to continue developing and growing. We've mentioned this in previous episodes, haven't we, about thinking about doing something can have almost as much power as doing it. And the last one, number 9, awareness. Become aware of what you are doing, sensing, thinking, and experiencing. The brain works at its highest level when in a state of awareness. And that to me sounded very much like the first one, movement with attention. But I guess if I read the book, I'd find out a bit more about the differences. But that's all I could glean from a bit of searching around on the internet. But I did think it was quite interesting. And like I say, it tapped into that, taking the blinkers off with always moving forwards, onwards and upwards, and looking a bit more left to right and expanding and learning and growing.
I'm also thinking, as you're describing this, kind of pulling in things we've talked about in other episodes, other things that I've learned about the brain and things. I'm oversimplifying this, but the reality is our brain doesn't like change because change means threat. And the reality that what she's describing is upgrading your brain. And I think it's one of those weird little mismatches. Developmentally, we weren't meant to develop too far. But now we live in a world with all of this opportunity for growth and expansion and all of the challenges that we have to face. So our brain needs to change a lot. It just made me think of how much in my own life and others that I know, we fall into a pattern of inertia. Because again, the brain likes repetition. The brain likes what it already knows. And recognizing there are times when we should use that, but we need to be engaged in this movement and this upgrading, this giving our brain opportunities to learn things. And the reason it learns, from what you said, is the differences, again, I'm thinking, mean threat somehow to the brain. It has to learn how to integrate this new information. So it has to upgrade. It has to create new connections. And so there's this sense of, in some ways, we're having to work against what our brain would naturally want us to do, which is not develop. Stay safe. Do the same thing. Don't encounter anything that requires stretching. And yeah, it's just kind of interesting to me, this whole idea that we need to do that. We need to push against that inertia to create these new connections. And I think I would have never known that that could be enhanced through movement. I would think it's all, intellectual exercises and things.
Yes, exactly.
So it's really cool that in order to continue to grow and develop and expand, we need movement, and we need certain aspects of movement or ways to engage in movement to help with that.
Yes, and it's interesting how powerful it is thinking out of the box, taking these sideways movements. I thought it was interesting, this example that she used about just bending over to see how far you could reach to the floor, because I've done that, and my instinct has always been, and it does work to a certain extent, that you breathe into it, and the more you breathe and relax into it, and you can reach further and further to the floor. But actually, a better way of doing it is to come back up and do these different movements, this stretching of the back, and straight away you can reach a bit further, and adding some twists. And I thought it was really interesting. It brought to mind as well, and I can't for the life of me remember his name, but a guy I interviewed for Keto Women ages ago, and he was talking about the importance of different movements from a fitness point of view. And he was talking about things like, he was talking very much about good indicators of moving into older age. And apparently, balance and grip strength are one of the biggest indicators. But he was saying the importance of changing things up. It reminded me when I listened to this that it was something that I started doing a little bit. He was saying, you shouldn't always just be moving forwards. So he said, do things like, instead of just moving forwards, turn and do some sideways movement, walk backwards. That's all much more challenging, engaging for your brain, but it impacts you. It improves your physical fitness. But it's this engaging physical and mental, I think. That's why dance apparently is supposed to be so good, because it mixes the two together. And I just, like you, I thought it was very interesting that it's helping your brain form these new neural pathways with practicing on very simple movements, but how that could have an impact on other things. So it just goes to show that you could put this into practice with something very simple. If you were trying to upgrade your brain mentally, maybe you're, in the process of learning a new skill or something like that, but how actually taking a bit of time out to play around with changing up some simple physical movements might actually have a really big impact on the new mental skill you're trying to acquire.
Yeah.
So I'm making a few leaps here about I should actually read the book and see if this is what she's suggesting. But that's certainly the implication I was getting from it.
And again, that just is further reinforcement of why we need more movement in our lives. And as you're talking about, I'm like, this is why I need to be more active. This is why that's so important. It's not only the cardiovascular benefits or but it's so stimulating for the brain, and it seems like we're continuing to learn how that is so.
That's right. So again, this could come back in with just taking a few minutes here and there just to think of different ways of doing simple movements.
It also makes me think how this, again, relates to different types of exercise or movement that people do, and maybe even more reinforcing for why yoga is so powerful. It's slowed down.
Yes.
More attention, awareness. All of, it kind of fits in with some of her 9 essential things.
Yes, that's right.
But those are also elements of yoga and qigong and different things. So,
yes, as they very much bring you into that mindfulness aspect, don't they? Focusing on the breathing, focusing on the environment.
Yeah, very cool.
So there you go. More sort of food for thought.
That's right. As always, Jim Kwik delivers something that makes you, just look at something a little differently, think about it, and then hopefully take some steps to incorporate it. You and I have been fans of his for a while now, but if anyone hasn't listened to any of his stuff, everything you listen to with Jim Kwik is valuable. You will get something. Plus, again, he's just a nice, good person. So easy to listen to. Like, you never feel like you're in a bad mood after you listen to something with him. It's like,
no, very good point.
Yeah.
Yes, he does strike me as being a very nice guy.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Hopefully you can take this into account this week, and we will see you again next time.
Have a great week.